So receiving is arguably one of the most important features in Fishbowl because everything sort of snowballs from there. If you get receiving wrong, then it's pretty bad, right? It will affect accounting and it will affect picking later on and maybe manufacturing later on. So in this video, we're going to take a look at all the features we can possibly think of in regards to receiving. So in Fishbowl, you can either use the desktop app to receive from the screen. The idea behind this is to have a computer next to the shipping and receiving area in close proximity so you can just count your inventory and record it immediately. The best practice is to assign the person that counted the inventory to be the person that actually recorded what he or she counted. So there's this guy, and there's also this guy here, this mobile device. You can receive from the mobile device as well and select the purchase order and then select the item and then enter the quantity you actually received, which can be less than or greater than what was actually received. Click, and we receive it. But there's more to it than that, right? We've got to count it, but we also need to put it where it ended up, whether it ended up in the receiving place or it ended up in the back ordered area or it ended up in stock, or what if you needed to put it close to a work order because the work order was waiting. That's kind of like a back ordered area, right? So let's look at that. From the receiving screen, we've got all these purchase orders over on the left-hand side that we can receive. And oh, we've got sales orders we can receive too. We'll look at those in a second. Let's look at a purchase order right now. And I want a little more real estate. So I'm going to smash this and get rid of that. In case you want to see that again, I clicked that little guy and it just sort of got rid of that so we had more space to work with over here. And let's get my mug out of the way too. So here we see everything on the purchase order. Now one thing to think about is we're not on the purchase order screen. Okay, you don't go to the purchase order screen to receive, you go to the receiving screen and open the purchase order from the receiving screen. Okay, and then don't smash this button up here on the left hand side. This receive button right here is typically a bad thing. Now, the reason I say that is because it will skip your ability to record the quantity or the location that you received it to. Now, in the rare case that everything is going to be received to the default location and the quantity that was on the PO is all received exactly as it was on the PO, then okay, maybe you can get away with hitting that receive button. But I think the best thing to do is hit the button over here on the right. This receive button right here only receives the line that you highlight. So the idea here is to highlight this line and then enter the quantity you actually received, or just double check that it's right, and select the location that you received it to, whether it's a location different than what's there, or it's, maybe just the receiving location. Could be just the receiving location. Now, this is going to default to the location group that was on the purchase order. So if you think the location group doesn't matter, think again. The location group does matter. So when you create a purchase order, whatever location group you select is the location group that's going to default here. The address, and over here in receiving is the location group that's going to default. Now let's talk about this default thing here for a little bit, because it's important to get the location right. And defaults help automate things, and sometimes they cause us to make mistakes, and sometimes they prevent us from making mistakes if we use them right. So let's talk a little bit about how the default location works. Okay, there's a couple different areas to look at. One, from the receiving screen, if we go to Tools, Module Options, we'll see this thing here that says receive to the default receiving location rather than the parts default location. What is it talking about there? Now, if we go to the parts screen, we'll go to the parts screen now and click on one of these parts, and then click on this tab right here on the parts screen that says default locations. We'll see that each location group has a default location that we can assign a default receiving location to. Now, the idea behind default locations is you have a big warehouse and you have enough space in this warehouse that you have the luxury of assigning a location, and a location would be a shelf or a bin or a section or a designated spot on the floor, right? That's a location in Fishbowl. It's a place in the warehouse, okay? A small place like a shelf or a rack. And so the idea behind default locations is you've got enough space in your warehouse that you can say, okay, this part always goes here and this part always goes here. Now, if you're really crammed for space and you don't have that luxury, then maybe default locations isn't for you, and you shouldn't even use default locations, right? You should just put it where you have space. But anyways, that's the idea behind default locations, is you can assign the place and then it will automatically appear in receiving. Now, I think this can help or cause problems depending on how it's used. It should be a way to tell someone where to put it. You should not be complacent and just say, oh, I'm just going to let the software record automatically so I don't have to record anything. At the end of the day, the receiver needs to be accountable and be responsible for what he or she told the software, right? So the goal is for this to match where you actually put it. Okay? All right. And these tools are just here to help you, for your workflow. Receive to the default receiving location rather than the parts default location. Okay, so I just showed you the parts default location. Now I'm going to show you the default receiving location. All right. So if we go to setup location, here, let me bring this up here. I went to setup location. And now over here on the left, we have a list of all of our locations. We've got the location group on the right and the location on the left. Okay, location group on the right, location on the left. And kind of a better example is if we actually had some locations that were a little more realistic, like aisle, section, shelf. If you set something up like that, I'll just auto create these. And you've got, locations, right? That is probably a little more realistic of what you have in your warehouse, is some labels on the racks, right? So in the LA warehouse, there is a receiving location and the type is receiving, but default location for this location type and group is not checked. If we check that, that will be the default receiving location for that location group. If we go to SLC and go to the receiving location in SLC, we see that this is grayed out, default location for this location type and group. That just means that if the part does not have a default location, that it'll default to that receiving location when you receive. And then this little checkbox up here on the receiving screen, this says even if you assign a default location to a part, receive it to the default location anyways. This is actually a really good feature in my opinion, because there's this feature on the transfer order screen called Putaway, And if you assign default locations to all your parts, then you can do a two-step receiving where you receive to the default receiving location, which is just receiving, but then use the Putaway feature over here on the transfer order screen, this Putaway feature. You can use this Putaway feature to grab everything that you put in receiving momentarily, right? The idea is to just set it in receiving temporarily, and then go from receiving to SLC, and it will grab everything that's in, it will grab everything that's in receiving. And if we click issue and go to picking will automatically see the default locations where you're supposed to go to. And I don't know if I have this set up, but yeah, kind of. So destination 100, 100, and this one's 300, this one's 200. So if we set up default locations, this picking screen will tell you on another step, on a Putaway step, where it belongs. So you could have a two-step receiving process where you first just receive into receiving, get it counted, get it in there, and maybe have the opportunity to label everything if you need to stick labels on, if they don't already have barcodes, or then you can stick those on and then use this Putaway feature to put it away. Okay, so some different options, different things you can do with the default receiving, right? You thought, man, I thought receiving was simple. Well, it can be, but not for everyone, right? If smaller companies have more simple receiving processes, larger companies may have more complex, more requirements in receiving to assure that it gets handled properly, put away properly. And that brings up another point is you may have a inspection step, right? You may want to receive it into inspection and make inspection your default receiving location, and then move it out of inspection once it passes inspection and put it away into stock, right? So we click on receiving. Another thing I want to show you is we say we've got this button up here. I said don't click that button. Well, there's actually a user group right. If we go to user groups, go to receiving, and click on access, scroll down to receiving, we'll see here that we've got receiving fulfillment, receiving item fulfillment, receiving item receive, receiving receive. So this receive translates to this button right here. This item receive, receiving item receive, translates into this button over here. So you can actually go to the user right screen and set it up to hide or show the buttons you want to be available for those on the receiving screen. So a receiver can receive and an accountant can record the vendor invoice on the receiving screen. I've got another video on reconciling if you want to check out that to see what the accountant's role is for entering a vendor invoice. Okay, so you highlight the line, you select the location that it should go in, click the truck on the right. Now here's a purchase order with two yellow lines. This is just a hold symbol is what this is. And the hold is grayed out over here. So something special is going on with this. And I see a repair service underneath that. That tells me this is probably an outsourced PO, which means we can't receive it until someone has picked, packed, and shipped it to a vendor to be hard-coded or something like that. We're shipping it out. In this case, it looks like there's a repair service, and that repair service was received, probably erroneously, because the two should happen simultaneously if it is what I think it is. But to find out what it is, I can click on this link. Now, if I'm just a receiver, I should probably be given view-only rights to the purchase order. Receivers generally shouldn't have rights to change the PO, but in this case, you can see that it's useful to see the PO because now I can verify, yep, this is an outsourced item. We're sending these brake cables out for some sort of repair service. There's something wrong with them, and they're sending it back. So I'll click on this link right here to go back to the receiving screen. Click back to the receiving screen. And this is bugging me. I'm going to click void right here and reverse that. So void, help me get rid of that. If the repair actually happened, then we should be receiving this back into stock. But it looks like the plot thickens. There's actually nothing in stock to receive. So I just grabbed a bad example, but it's good to understand what's going on, right? When you see these symbols on the receiving screen, it's important to understand what's going on. And basically, I clicked on this link to the PO, clicked on to pick, and I saw, oh, we're waiting to send something out, but it looks like we don't have anything to send out. How funny. I wonder what the story is behind that. And this is just a demo database. It's just sample data, and that's the story in this case. So sometimes things don't completely make sense with sample data. Let's look at another one here. Okay, so in this case, we have a sales order. We're receiving a sales order. The time that you would receive a sales order is when the customer is returning it, right? So oftentimes, if they're returning it, we probably want to bring it back to a returns location. We actually have a location called returns. So that's good to do. And we click the truck. And oh, this has serial number tracking. So we need to put a serial number in to say what serial number we're receiving and finish and receive that serial number. So I've got another video on RMAs, Return Merchant Authorization. Be sure to check that video out if you want to know more about the process for returns. I do have a video on outsourced purchase orders too, so be sure to check out that video if you want to know more about outsourced purchase orders. Another thing you may want to see here is labeling. I mentioned that just briefly a little bit ago. Labeling. If we receive something, then we can label it. Now, that's the weird thing that throws some people off is we've got this label. I made my own custom label here, but it's blank until I actually receive something. So after I receive something, then I can run the label and it's actually filled in. This is the standard label by Fishbowl. We just redid it. We customized it so one part could be on one label. So another useful process to consider with receiving, here, let's pull up this example, is this report here. This often falls in place, this receiving list. If you don't have a mobile device to receive with, like this guy here, then the receiving list is another good way to assure that you're recording the correct quantity that you counted and the location that you put it to. Now, sometimes the packing list that the vendor provides for you is good enough and you can just write down the quantity on the packing list and maybe jot down the location you received it to on the packing list. But if not, this is a good option right here, this receiving list. So if you need to print barcodes for parts that you've received, there's other options here as well to print that. This, you actually have to select the PO, and that's actually coming up blank. Now, the only reason I can think of that would come up blank is because this part is not for sale, and this is a product barcode. So products in Fishbowl are parts that are for sale. It's not a part barcode. This L1SW body here, this guy here, And sure enough, we look down here and there's not a product for it. So the product barcode is not going to work for this one because it's only a part and we never sell it. But this label will work, either Fishbowl standard label or the custom label that we created, if you receive it. There's some other receiving labels that you can consider for receiving. One is the part barcode by PO one-off or PO Avery. We can add it to that drop-down list. We come here, check that box, part barcode by PO one-off, part barcode by PO Avery. Both of them show on the purchase order, but not in the receiving drop-down. So we're gonna add them to the receiving drop-down here. From this details section right here, we can add it to the drop-down. So back on the receiving screen, now that we added it, if we go to reports, there's the two that we just added. We added it to that drop-down. So this is one that can print labels even if we don't receive it. Now think about that for a minute. That comes in handy possibly over here on the mobile device, because the mobile device, let's refresh this. Okay, now that's refreshed. We'll go to the PO, and this little button right here, this print button, this prints whatever we have as the default receiving report. So what that means is we can make this label, the part barcode PO1 off label, we can make that label the default label for this screen right here. You want me to show you how to do that? Let me show you how to do that. Go to the report screen, pull up this report, the part barcode PO1 off. We already have it pulled up. Just as a reference. Actually, you don't need to have it pulled up. But if we go to Tools, Module Options, right here, from the report screen, we're on the report screen, we're going to Tools, Module Options. And it gives us a list of all the screens that we can assign default reports for. We're going to scroll down to the receiving screen. Scroll, scroll, scroll. And we've got receiving label, and we've got receiving. Now you would think receiving label would be the default, but that's not what I found out. Scroll down and we're going to make the part barcode PO1 off the default report for receiving. Click OK. And probably need to log out, log back in for that to take. Okay, log out, log back in. And go to the receiving screen and select the PO we want to receive. Now we've got this print button option here. We click print and there we go. There's our label. So if you're looking for a way to print labels before you receive, this is a good option. But remember, this is PO labels. This is going to give you labels for everything. So this is heavy duty brake cables, and we just have a ton of labels here. And it opened up Word, and this is on purchase order 10089. Repeating a lot, that's strange because this is only receiving one. Strange, you may have to look into that a little bit better. Back on this screen over on the left hand side is our list of purchase orders. And if we want to take a look at what showed up on the mobile device, we can say, show me everything that is receivable. All receivable. And it was this one that we were looking at. And oh, strange, the plot thickens. Once again, I just grabbed a bad example, I think. This one might be a better example. So P10074, let's grab that. Works. It may not work, we'll see. You may just have to print labels after you receive instead of before. Seems like it's not selecting a PO, it's not filtering the PO. So My harebrained idea didn't work here. This is just grabbing all kinds of parts, the part number on that PO. So that label may have to be customized to look at what's on the receiving screen instead. Okay, other things to consider when receiving. We've got shipping down here, tracking number, package carrier. This is shipping information when you receive, but also probably what's even more noteworthy is this guy here, the open orders. This will really help triage or route what you're receiving. Notice we've got some work orders that are calling for this part. You may have sales orders that are calling for your part. And the date that those work orders are scheduled, so the priority of those work orders. So we may just want to click on the link to that work order and take a look at the location that that work order is being built in by clicking on details right here, and that will tell us where we should receive it to. Pretty cool, huh? So it'll help us route our receiving and receive to the most ideal place. If we use the system right, then we'll achieve our goal of having the fewest number of touches or the fewest number of footsteps. We want our inventory tracking to be efficient in the warehouse, right? So if you need it on a sales order or need it on a work order, it doesn't really make sense to put it away and then create a pick ticket. Why not just take the fewest footsteps and take it right to where it needs to be, to the order that's waiting for it. So that's cool. This button right here, we haven't talked about that, reject. So you can reject a part, and what that's going to do is leave it open in the system to make it say damaged or something. Leave it open. Notice we rejected one, we began with 3, and so we're still waiting for 3 to arrive. Maybe we rejected 1 and we received 2. So we would change this to 2 and click receive. So now we've got the 1 reject and the 1 we're still waiting for. They may decide, well, we can't get it to you in time, and we may just cancel the order. In that case, we click on this link right here to the PO screen, and we can close it short most of the time. This won't let us close it short because we haven't yet reconciled. It says receipts or shipments must be fulfilled or entered in order to close short this purchase order. So what it's talking about is this line right here is not in a fulfilled or entered status. This is in an entered status, but this is a received status. In order to close short a purchase order, you need blue check marks and green triangles. This one is okay, you can have that, but so we can't close short the PO until we reconcile and bring this through the reconciliation process right here, which I go over in a different video. Closing short is something you've got to get down. The receivers or the accountants, probably the accountant is usually the best person to close short POs. Because that's the point where it's been received and then the vendor invoice has been entered. And at that point, the bookkeeper, accountant, or controller should know whether or not that PO will be completed or not. If it's not, at that point, you can click the close short button. The goal is to have a clean file that's easy to read and understandable by all those that are looking at it. And so what I see sometimes is people forget to reconcile. They don't really realize that that's a step. And so they've got this huge long list of open POs and they're wondering, why don't these close? That's also a problem I see with transfer orders a lot, because you don't really think about reconciling a transfer order because you don't get a bill from the vendor. But it's important to reconcile a transfer order for 2 reasons. One, it's not considered closed unless you do, so you're kind of forced to. You have to close out transfer orders. But 2 is transfer orders may have shipping applied to them. So you can land the shipping cost and lift the costing layer value up by the allocated shipping cost. And that happens in reconciliation too, and I go over that in another video. But the receiver's job at this point is just to mainly get the location right and the quantity right. Those are the 2 main responsibilities of the receiver, is to get the location right, well, and the part number. And if you have lot numbers or serial numbers, then it's important to get those in the system. So let's talk about that just for a second. Top left-hand corner, if we go to File, Import, and go to Receiving, I'm just going to type in RE, and it'll automatically narrow it down. We've got Receiving Data Import right here. This is a lifesaver in a lot of cases. Receiving Data Import. In order to import a large amount of items being received, or the reason I thought of this is because we mentioned serial number tracking. If you have hundreds of serial numbers, obviously you probably don't want to scan every single one of them. Probably makes more sense to just import the serial numbers from a spreadsheet. And with this, you can do that. PO num, fulfill, vendor part number. These are the column headers over on the left-hand side. Shipping tracking number. And here's the big one right here, tracking. So tracking dash and the tracking value. Let's take a look at what this looks like. We'll just export the template and we'll see what it looks like on a spreadsheet. So this is the format, or this is the layout the data needs to be in order for Fishbowl to recognize it. PO number, vendor part number, quantity, location that it's being received to, and then notice over here we've got tracking dash serial number, tracking dash lot number. So if the part is tracked by lot number or serial number, Fishbowl will require you to enter the lot number or serial number when you receive it. It's a requirement. Okay. So just to explain what I'm talking about here, over here on the part screen, if we go to a part and click on the Details tab, we'll see this tracking area. If I check this box right here and turn lot number tracking on, then anytime I receive, the system will require that lot number. It'll also require it when you pick it or manufacture it and all those other things, but we're talking about receiving right now. So, so yeah, on the part screen, if you turn serial number tracking on or lot number tracking, whatever tracking you decide to turn on, there's even custom tracking. You can make your own tracking if you want. But whatever tracking you have turned on, that will be required when you receive. Now, one thing I see people doing sometimes is kind of weird, is they want to track where it came from, right? So they say, well, I'm going to create my own custom tracking and say vendor tracking or PO tracking and put the PO number. What they don't realize is the history is already there. The audit trail is already there. You don't need to do that. It's kind of overkill. The system already keeps track of who you bought it from, what PO number it came in on, you know. But I don't know, you might have an exception to that rule. These guys over here, these fields, build date, reference number, reconcile date, it's rare that those need to be used, and the receiver shouldn't touch those usually. Those are for reconciling, and it's really best to use this reconcile button instead of these fields down here. Customer job will auto-populate if the customer job is filled in on the purchase order right here. So that's cool. If you want to know what customer it's for. Receiving date, you can backdate. So some accountants like that. If you received yesterday and you were busy or lazy or whatever happened, and you couldn't receive yesterday, but you want to record that that is actually when it came in, then okay, you can receive. On that note, let's pull up QuickBooks here for a second. If we receive in Fishbowl and you use QuickBooks Desktop, it will create an item receipt in QuickBooks Desktop. If you use QuickBooks Online, let's pull this up here. So we're at the chart of accounts on QuickBooks Online now. If you use QuickBooks Online, then there is no item receipt. Instead, Fishbowl uses this other current liabilities account that it wants you to call a holding account. So when you receive, it'll debit inventory and credit this holding account. As opposed to QuickBooks Desktop, it'll debit inventory and credit payables, which kind of makes us cringe, right? We like the way QuickBooks Online does it better. And to just kind of explain a little bit more about what Fishbowl does in QuickBooks Online when we receive is, this is a good example right here, this $12 and $12. We received it here, we see received PO 10078, $12. And then when we reconciled it, it actually took it back out of the holding account and then created a bill and debited inventory credit payables. So actually what it does is when you receive using QuickBooks Online, it debits inventory, credits the holding account. Then when you reconcile, it credits inventory, debits the holding account, then debits inventory again and credits the payable account. So it just does a reverse transaction to sort of take it back out of there. Now with QuickBooks Desktop, when you receive, this is important to understand, is it creates an item receipt at first, right, which debits inventory and credits payables. But then when you reconcile later, it actually checks this box. Now what happens under the hood, this is important to understand, to the database is when you check that box, it doesn't look like much to the user looking at the screen, but to the database, there's actually a huge change. When you check that box, it actually deletes the item receipt as if it never existed. Kind of scary, yes. And it will create a bill. So if you think about how that might affect a third-party inventory management software talking to QuickBooks, you should never check this box in QuickBooks because you'll end up with a duplicate bill. What happens is Fishbowl will create the item receipt, you check that box, it'll delete the item receipt as if it never existed, and now Fishbowl has no transaction ID to tie to. And then when you reconcile in Fishbowl, since it has no transaction ID to tie to, it doesn't know what else to do but create a bill with a new transaction ID. So now you created a bill when you check the box, and then Fishbowl created a bill. So don't ever check that box. Story. That's the moral of the story. Okay, so yeah, when you receive, it creates an accounting transaction. We go over here to accounting. We'll see that here's a green triangle. That means it's queued up, ready to go to QuickBooks. And if we have a successful connection to QuickBooks, which I think we do, and we click export, okay, so far so good. Looks like we've got a successful connection to QuickBooks. Now we'll see item receipts, item receipts, item receipts. It says item receipts, but when you're using QuickBooks Online, it's actually just the journal entry. It's not actually an item receipt. So it just made 7 new journal entries from all the playing around I just did in this video. all the playing around I just did in this video. So this register should have more in it now. And if I click refresh, yep, I refreshed my browser, and now we've got new transactions in here. Today is February 20th, the day I'm recording this, February 20th, 2024. And here's all the transactions from receiving. So hope you enjoyed this video, this deep dive video for Fishbowl receiving. Plenty to cover. And comment below if you have any comments, and to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe. And if you found this helpful, click like. And if you think I missed anything, comment below and say, Lance, what about this? What about that? We'll see you next video.